Here now with Congressman Andre Carson. Congressman, thank you so much for being with us. I want to start by getting your thoughts to what we've seen in Minnesota over the last week, the events themselves, and also the potential constitutional implications.
There are many constitutional implications here. I mean, last week, I voted against the Homeland Security Appropriations Bill simply because I refused to rubber stamp more lawlessness by ICE. And today, I'm even calling for the unlawful assaults by ICE to end. We're calling for ICE as we know it to no longer exist. And so operations by ICE in these urban areas, particularly Minneapolis, they must be suspended. We saw the murder of Alex Preddy. It shows that without a doubt, this very rogue agency is out of control. And, since Donald Trump took office last year, there have been at least 25 shootings by immigration agents, resulting in 8 deaths, and 5 of these deaths were U.S. citizens. ICE is detaining close to 4,000 children, maybe even more. That includes 20 infants. So Trump has filled DHS and ICE with people who don't have any regard for rule of law or respect for our Constitution.
But there certainly is the possibility that this leads to a partial government shutdown. There's talk of potentially a deal that would separate out DHS funding from the rest of the spending bill, which would then have to go back to the House. Across the aisle, Indiana Senator Jim Banks put out a social media post today saying Democrats are willing to shut down the government because they prioritize these immigrants who aren't here legally over American citizens. He called that shameful. In his words, what's your response to that?
Well, it's simply untrue. I think that this shutdown has to be talked through. This would be a partial shutdown, so it would have minimal impact. And no one wants to see a shutdown, but we simply cannot continue to fund this administration's business as usual. I voted against DHS funding in the House, and hopefully Senate Democrats will oppose DHS funding, and some Senate Republicans should join us. Currently, only 6 of the 12 appropriations bills for fiscal year 2026 have been enacted. That ranges from energy and water, interior, the legislative branch, veterans affairs, military construction, and agriculture, to name a few. So this effectively means that if there is a government shutdown, after January 30th, these departments would not be impacted and would operate despite a partial shutdown. And, we have some remaining bills that are still incomplete. But if there is a shutdown, it's up to the Senate on how messy things could get. And that would depend on how the Senate considers the remaining bills. So if there are brave senators who vote against DHS funding, then the shutdown after Friday, if it were to happen, would only impact DHS.
Of course, the bill could then come back to the House. We also spoke recently with another member of the Indiana delegation, Congressman Jim Baird, and here's what he had to say about all this.
Do you share any of their concerns that perhaps some of these policies have gone too far?
Well, you always need to be aware of the consequences of the actions that you take. But when you think about we're removing the worst of the worst of this 20 million or so, or how many ever that we've come across the border.
We've also heard of instances where U.S. citizens have been taken into custody by ICE. Does that concern you?
Well, you really don't know for sure exactly what happened. So I like to make sure that I remember in combat, they say the first reports are never accurate. So I want to make sure we get the appropriate information and make sure we're treating people fairly.
Congressman, what's your response to what Congressman Baird said there, and this notion that the plan was to target the worst of the worst, so to speak?
Well, if only that were true in this instance. I think the original charter from ICE enacted by Congress was meant to deal with that segment of society, was to deal with criminal enterprises, shipping contraband into our country. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing an agency that has devolved into a rogue militia, a gang of sorts. And, ICE is really imposing domestic terrorism on U.S. communities and families. ICE is inflicting psychological terror on Americans, physical terror on Americans. So all ICE enforcement operations must stop right now. We are bearing witness to atrocities and building a case to prosecute. There has to be and must be federal consequences for these actions.
A lot of debate between Democrats and Republicans over this. It's also a midterm election year. You're facing a challenge in the primary. Your opponent in the primary this year put out a statement calling for DHS to be defunded. He said anything less is missing the moment. We can't keep reacting after people are killed. He said our district deserves leadership that doesn't wait to be pushed. What's your response to that and his assertion there that perhaps you should have been more vocal about this sooner? It sounds like that's what he's suggesting here.
Well, I've been vocal from day one on this matter. I've been on the bills. I was vocal as it related to ICE overreach, excess, oppression, killing. I was very vocal about IDS killing of Palestinians. He was silent. And so it's clearly a move to be opportunistic. And listen, he wants to come and mansplain to people what should be done when he hasn't been around. He's styling himself as a modern day slave master who wants a member of Congress of color, a black man, to report to him and clear things with him before I speak. That'll never happen. It's a new day.
Where is all of this headed? Not just in Congress in terms of what might happen with a shutdown, but in terms of the administration's approach and the tactics, the agency's tactics, ICE's tactics, Border Patrol's tactics. And are you concerned we might potentially see similar enforcement measures here in the state of Indiana?
That is our deep concern. I have to give Hoosiers a lot of credit, being a fellow Hoosier. Democrats and Republicans work together to push back on redistricting. Indiana is a beacon of light, and because of our efforts, other states have quieted their momentum. And I think what is special about Indiana is that we think very independently. And, I think eliminating ICE as we know it does not mean eliminating immigration law, but it does mean a call for humane enforcement. ICE can and did function in a humane way without trampling on due process under President Obama and harassing and killing citizens as well. That was never their mandate, but it functioned with due process. We're not seeing that right now. It functioned with an order of deportation and a court appearance and a judge. That's been eliminated. There is no law and there is no order, just unchecked power and cruelty.
So to clarify, when you call for eliminating or defunding ICE,
as we know it, entirely,
or as we know it currently, do
yes.
You wish it to exist in some form as it may have in previous administrations?
I think the current form is untenable. It doesn't work. I think that there's still the enforcement piece as it relates to criminal enterprises and contraband coming into our country. That's still a function that has to be overseen and regulated and enforced. But ICE has devolved. I think about those men and women years ago who signed up to serve their country. They've been displaced by people who simply want to check, by people who simply want power for power's sake, by people who simply want to push Donald Trump's very destructive, divisive, and hateful agenda.
Congressman Carson, we thank you for being with us. A lot certainly going on this issue with some big implications, and we appreciate your time talking about your perspective on all of this with everything happening in Congress this week.
What an honor. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Congressman. We appreciate it.
Thank you. You too.